Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Off the Wall Novels. Joining me as my co-host is Pringle Backer, and today we're going to give our first impressions of The Doorstop, The Recognitions by William Gaddis. I did not think that I was going to read this book after I bought it. I had moved to New York and I, for whatever reason, just decided to put it in my Amazon cart and then it ended up at my house. But I love New York so much, it's sometimes difficult for me to justify sitting inside and reading. And so just in the past couple of years, I've been reading a lot of shorter books when I have the headspace for it. Also during grad school, almost an entire year ago now, I just didn't have any energy to commit to reading that much. And so I was kind of lax with the channel, unfortunately. I tried to do my best to post every once in a while. But even a year after my grad program is over, I still feel like I'm decompressing from the experience last year of working all day and then going to grad school all night and then doing work all during the weekend, creative work and then work for grad school. And so now that I'm a little bit more decompressed, it actually makes sense for me to commit myself to reading something like this. But I bought it over 2 years ago now, and I knew that I'd probably get to it eventually, but I didn't think I'd get to it this soon. And just this last weekend, I was flipping through The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which I did a video essay about a little while ago. Check that out if you want. And for whatever reason, as I was going through it, I was like, you know what? I kind of want to get into the recognitions. And in my last couple of videos here, I had spoken about how I was super into the occult and getting into alchemy and different aesthetics and spiritual systems like that. And so I had a big TBR for this whole summer that I'm going to use in order to work on my next novel, The Kingdom of Liminal Space. And I'm kind of ditching that. But then, as you already might know, there's a lot of occult symbolism and investigation in the recognitions, which is a blast. And it's also just subverting my expectations because, as you guys know, this gets compared to Infinite Jest and Gravity's Rainbow and just those authors in general, David Foster Wallace and Thomas Pynchon. But I don't think people really give this the best pitch, because anytime somebody asks you about the recognitions, they say that it's about counterfeits and just the idea of counterfeiting in general. That's like the central investigation that it's going for. And on its face, that was not super interesting to me, but I'm sure that, I might have dug it more the more that I got into it. But a lot of people also had mentioned that it's just full of really dense references to art and history. And that made me a little resistant to read it because I just have not been reading big, long books like this recently, like I said. And the idea of having to put the book down to look something up was kind of frustrating and just like not that appealing to me. I want something that I can kind of really dig into and just gain some momentum. And so I'm delighted to say that that expectation was kind of wrong. And the other expectation that I had for it, which was also wrong, was that it would be very fragmented, like Gravity's Rainbow, or even like Infinite Jest, that the first time you read either of those books, you're kind of like, where is this going? Are these characters going to come back? And especially for Pynchon, even though he's probably my favorite author, that's my biggest complaint about him, that he'll have a character you really like or a section that you really, really like, and then he'll just be like, next. And then sometimes those characters don't ever come back, and that can be kind of frustrating. But I am very, very delighted to find that this is so much more focused than I expected, and its themes are loud and clear, which are super cool. But like I said, since most people talk about it as being about counterfeit, I don't think that they always capture the idea that it's also about how everything is kind of inspired by what came before it too. And I'm sure as I read more, this will become more fleshed out. But when we talk about a counterfeit, it's easy to just get that idea of, oh, this is fake. This is just a fake thing, which has a very bad connotation. And maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to be more than that. It seems to be about how everything that we know today is inspired by what came before. So there was a section where he describes how Paris is mining the aesthetics and architecture and culture even of ancient Rome. And in my interpretation of that section, I didn't get the sense that he was like, oh, Paris is fake. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm like not getting what he's going for, but I think that I am onto something here, because to say that it's just fake feels a little shallow. But to say that it's like everything is a reduplication or a copy of what came before, a copy of a copy of a copy, is a little bit more interesting. And so maybe just the joke was on me and I didn't dig enough into these synopsises or into the reviews of people who've talked about it before, but it seems extremely different from what I thought it was going to be. And more than anything, a couple images jump out to me that I want to talk about today, and I would say that there's going to be some light spoilers for the first, 120 pages of the book or so. So if you want to go in completely blind, don't watch this, but I can imagine a lot of people who are watching this have already read this book before. So I just want to say some of the stuff that stuck out to me so far. I loved this stuff with Aunt May at the very beginning and her being this like kind of strict fundamentalist Christian, a Protestant, I believe, and her really trying to steer young Wyatt toward the right path while Reverend Guyon, or Gwyn, I've heard it both ways, is nominally a priest or a reverend, but then has a lot of like pagan and occult interests and practices. And so it should be clear that just within the character is a representation of that main theme, that even though he is presented as someone who is just a run-of-the-mill Christian, he has some stuff that he's kind of hiding from his congregation. And then as he's leading sermons, he'll start drifting from the usual way that you're supposed to do a sermon in a Christian church in order to kind of like bend those rules and bring in those occult elements. So that alone is just really fun as an aesthetic and just as a theme for the book. And it also seems to be mirrored in, I believe it's called the Basilica de San Clemente. That is a real basilica that is built on top of a like pagan ritual site. I don't think they called them churches, but I don't know the word off the top of my head, but just like Reverend Gwyn or Guyon is this seemingly Christian thing with pagan and occult underpinnings, that actual structure, I believe, is built on like two different old types of religions that are much more obscure. And so it's really cool to see those themes represented both in characters and in locations that they speak about in the book. And this is going to be probably the biggest spoiler that I give so far. But again, this is in the first 100 pages or so. Him sacrificing Heracles, the orangutan, was so cool and reminded me so much of Infinite Jest too, just in the way that the information is delivered, because he doesn't really give you an actual like ritual sacrifice. He just shows Reverend Gwyn or Guyon in his study reading about how in order to ward off evil spirits they would sacrifice an animal, and then he is, going into the backyard and he takes Heracles and just walks him across the lawn, and that's all you get. And then there's a very kind of hard to pin down paragraph right after that where young Wyatt is sick with delirium and has this kind of strange, trippy experience that reminded me a whole lot of the way that the information is delivered in those first few chapters of Infinite Jest, where John Wayne and Don Gately and Hal are in the cemetery holding up himself's head. And then it's just, brushed past. And it seems pretty clear to me that Infinite Jest was inspired by this. I've heard other people say that, but during my big David Foster Wallace phase, I never read anything about that. Or if I did, I didn't have as much of an understanding of who William Gaddis was, so maybe I just didn't remember it. But I'm seeing it loud and clear in this book. But I've got to say, I think already this is the better novel, and I love Infinite Jest. We shouldn't necessarily compare them, but they are big postmodern doorstop books. And if indeed the recognitions did inspire Infinite Jest, they kind of lend themselves to comparison. But I think where the recognitions is a little bit more appealing to me anyway, more than Infinite Jest and Gravity's Rainbow, is that it just feels more like a regular novel. Like, it is postmodern in its content and the imagery that it explores, but it doesn't seem like he's doing a lot of crazy formal, weird, look ma, no hands kind of stuff. It seems like he's just trying to evoke feeling and realism. And as soon as Wyatt and Esther's scenes are introduced, his wife, it's just so beautiful. And the scenes are so well rendered, and you really feel a lot of humanity in these characters which is an area that postmodern literature often gets accused of lacking in, like especially Pynchon, who again is probably my favorite author of all time, but maybe it's justified with his theme about how humanity disappears behind images that are passed down from myths, and history can't really escape, or I'm sorry, the present moment can't really escape all of the significance that we inherit from history. But yeah, his books are kind of light on characters sometimes, or that's not the thing that jumps off the page the most. Like, I'm convinced that, for example, The Crying of Lot 49 has a lot of humanity and a lot of feeling in it, but it took me a couple reads to find that, because it's not a very easy book. But the feelings and the humanity like really jump off the page here, and I'm never asking myself like, why are we here? It seems to really be focused in a refreshing way, and the fact that he published this even before V or The Crying of Lot 49 or a lot of those other postmodern novels, it just makes me think like, this is the true godfather of postmodern lit. And again, it doesn't have to be a comparison, but just that he achieved this first and then achieved it in so much more of like a integrated way. That's the big thing that is so refreshing and so exciting about this book, is that it just feels like a novel, but you still get all of that fun stuff. You still get the playfulness, you still get the humor and like the sarcasm and the kind of dry way of describing things and taking little jabs at people. It's just a lot of fun. It's super cool. And just the way too that these characters really seem to believe in not only art, but they seem to believe in this occult underpinning behind everything. And so another potential spoiler is related to this idea that Wyatt describes that a book he has read says that we are being fished for. And what they mean by that is that we are these beings, and it's as if there are these, I think they're called like supra-celestial or super-celestial beings that are like fishing for us or like harvesting us in some way, which is definitely not specific to the recognitions. I believe whatever book he's referencing is just one of a lot of different writers and pieces that describe that like humanity in some level is like a harvesting ground for souls, or like we're here for this training ground in order to ennoble ourselves or become better versions of ourselves, either for the afterlife or for these, higher selves that are using us for that. And so in particular, he kind of drops in those occult elements and then really elegantly comes back to them in the world of the characters. And so in particular, when he says that like we are being fished for, later when Esther finds out that he entered the seminary for a while in order to become a priest, when they encounter this old priest on the street, they bring that back in this really beautiful way, that essentially he says, "Can't you imagine that we're fished for, walking on the bottom of a great celestial sea? Do you remember the man who came down the rope to undo the anchor caught on the tombstone?" And then in the next paragraph, when they encounter the actual priest, there's a lot of this like watery imagery, which I just think is so well done, but it's not like hidden. It's simultaneously understated, but like right there too. So he mentions we're being fished for, everything's like a celestial sea, and then Gaddis writes, "Then she heard his name called. It seemed to come from a great distance, like a cry in a dream, or underwater. She might have imagined it, but it was repeated. Then there stood the priest before them, in a black hat and coat, and the round collar, carrying a suitcase. Hurrying to catch the train, she heard him say. She heard him, heard her husband's voice, her own for a moment sounding especially loud, their greetings, the hurried, slightly embarrassed renewal of their acquaintanceship, all as though they were suddenly met in a submarine landscape where only the others were at home and she fighting desperately to the surface. As she had that one moment when her voice burst, 'How do you—' and then it trails off from there. But just those little touches of him describing it as a submarine landscape and Esther having to fight to the surface and that they're in a dream or underwater, I think is enough to amount to a pattern that demonstrates that my reading is correct. That right after speaking of this celestial sea that they're in, he's using all of this watery imagery in order to, I don't know yet, Because when I first read that paragraph, I was like, oh, so this man is like from another dimension. This priest that he's encountering is like one of the beings that's harvesting us. And I don't know if it's going to get into that territory. Something actually tells me no, it's not. It's just going to stay in the world. But he's definitely purposefully trying to put us in that headspace with a lot of this stuff. And so I can only imagine if it does indeed turn out to be mostly about counterfeiting and fakery, then there's not going to be a big fun occult reveal. But I don't know. I'm only about 120 pages in. I did not mean to lie on Instagram, but I said I was 180 pages in because I just forgot when I had posted it. So I overshot it a little bit. But overall, I can just tell this is already going to be one of my favorite books. And I'm on a cool streak right now because, as you guys know, if you've seen my past videos, I was frustrated for a really long time that I couldn't find something to really grab me. But after getting into the occult and getting into these old German idealists and German thinkers in the 1700s, I came across On the Marble Cliffs by Ernst Jünger that I'm going to do a video essay about that just completely floored me. It's so beautiful and has a lot of this kind of old-fashioned credulity in spirituality without undercutting it with postmodern irony or detachment. And in general, in my next book, The Kingdom of Liminal Space, I want to stare into the face of that stuff a little bit more rather than playfully using it as an aesthetic just to kind of joke about it, which is kind of where I was as a person and spiritually when I wrote that book. So I don't regret, or I'm sorry, when I wrote Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe, my last book, which I'm still extremely proud of, but at that point in my life, I hadn't completely accepted my interest in spirituality, or I didn't really know what to do with it. And so it's really cool to be at this place right now where I feel like I have so many books unread on my shelf that are in that realm and kind of under that umbrella. But before this video gets too long, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I just wanted to share with you guys that I absolutely love what I've read of the recognition so far, and I'm going to be posting a longer video about it once I dig deeper into it, and definitely some kind of wrap up once it's finished, hopefully before the end of the summer. But I'm also going to be on summer break, so I'm going to try to post a lot more videos going forward and hopefully have a little bit more gas in the tank once school starts in the fall. But thank you so much for watching. Check out my book, Lionel, Lancet, and the Right Vibe. Check out my last EP called I Quit. It's here on YouTube and then also on streaming platforms. And my next novel, The Kingdom of Liminal Space, comes out with Christmas with a corresponding concept album. I'm so excited to share both with you. Have a good one, guys.